Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part 4 as we look at the second portion of Christianity, explaining the Great Schism. And we should finish up this particular portion in this lecture. But anyway, essentially, big cause here, we're in the 1000s, so we're in the second millennium. And the issue of the filioque has once again become a problem for the Eastern and Western Church. And what that is that, on the Western side, when they recite the Nicene Creed, they will often say the words, "We believe in the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Father and the Son." Well, the words "and the Son" are not part of the original creed. And, the attitude that comes from the West is that, well, when we recite the creed in Greek, the language that it was originally written in, and this is still the attitude today, we will not say those words. But unless the liturgy is actually being celebrated in, Greek, or more specifically in a Greek country, Greek-speaking country, where they would be reciting the creed in Greek, that's not going to happen. So anyway, 1054, Leo the Ninth, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, he sends some representatives to Constantinople, led by Cardinal Humbert of Mortimer's. Well, angered by his treatment from the Patriarch Michael I, the Bishop of Constantinople, Cardinal Humbert, he places a letter of excommunication on the altar of the Hagia Sophia, the Bishop of Constantinople's church. So Cardinal Humbert, he comes over from Rome, and he's well received by the emperor, the Byzantine emperor, but the Bishop of Constantinople essentially shuns him. And so, by doing this, he walks into the church, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of the Holy Wisdom, which is the church of the Bishop of Constantinople, in this case Michael I. He places a letter of excommunication on the altar of the Hagia Sophia, basically declaring, "You are no longer part of the church." And then he and those that came with him make their way back to Rome. Now, ironically, and the cardinal obviously did not know this because communication was much different during this time period, but he actually did not have the authority to do what he did. The authority that he had came from Pope Leo the Ninth. But while, he is over in Constantinople, Leo the Ninth dies in Rome. So the authority that Cardinal Humbert had died with Pope Leo the Ninth, so he actually did not have the authority to write a letter of excommunication and basically excommunicate, in this case, the Bishop of Constantinople, but he didn't know that at the time. But, many of the Eastern bishops thought that Rome was in the wrong over the issue of the filioque, regardless of how much authority that the cardinal had, and this caused the church to divide, to split into Catholic and Orthodox factions, which still exist today. So regardless, of how much authority that the cardinal, had or did not have, many of the Eastern bishops, they thought Rome is in the wrong, Rome referring to, the bishop, the pope, is in the wrong over this issue with the filioque, and this causes the church to divide into Catholic and Orthodox factions, which still exist today. The Catholic side are those who are in communion with the Bishop of Rome, whom we commonly refer to as the Pope. The Orthodox side, they are in communion with the Bishop of Constantinople. That is their main bishop. But the Bishop of Constantinople does not run the Orthodox Church like the Pope runs the Catholic Church. So let's look at four doctrinal differences between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. And by doctrinal difference, we're referring to something, very specific here. Not things like whether, clergy should be married or celibate, or should there be musical accompaniment in worship. Those are disciplinarian issues. They're not, doctrinarial issues, something everybody has to believe. But one is that the role of the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, as head of the earthly church and as infallible when speaking from the chair of Peter. While those in the Orthodox community are not in communion with the Bishop of Rome, that doesn't mean that historically speaking he's an unimportant bishop. He is still recognized as first among equals. He is recognized as, having a special type of primacy, as being, the successor of Saints Peter and Paul. But that is pretty much it. They don't recognize him as head of the earthly church. They would say that's too much authority to give to a person. And they certainly don't recognize him as being infallible. And, the whole papal infallibility, this only relates to things regarding basically matters related to faith and morals, and this wasn't defined until 1870 with Vatican I. But basically, the teaching is that, and the language has to be very specific. There's only two times that the church has officially, in this case, the Catholic Church, recognized something like this. One was 1854, the other was 1950. And again, the language has to be very specific. But the teaching is that, when the Pope speaks from his official position as the successor of St. Peter and St. Paul, that on issues related to faith and morals, that God prevents him from making an error in that regard. Well, on the Orthodox side, that is again too much authority to give to one man. So, again, the Pope, he's not an unimportant bishop, but they don't recognize him as head of the earthly church, and they certainly don't recognize him as infallible when speaking from the chair of Peter. To them, that's too much authority to give to one man. Another notion is that the Immaculate Conception of Mary is a doctrine in the Catholic Church, but not in the Orthodox Church. This was something that was not defined by the Catholic Church until 1854. But the teaching is that Jesus, as the perfect offering for sin, he, of course, receives his human side from his mother, Mary. So in order for him to, be the perfect offering for sin, that means he must have been born with perfect human flesh. And so, according to this teaching, when Mary was conceived in the womb of her mother, Saint Anne, God prevented her from receiving the stain of what is known as original sin, so that when she was born with perfect human flesh, and therefore when Jesus was born from her, he would have perfect human flesh, and therefore, of course, would be the perfect offering for sin. Now, there are some in the Orthodox Church that would agree with this teaching, but many of them might hold to, the point of view of, St. Thomas Aquinas, the great Western theologian in the scholastic era, the Middle Ages, where he held a view that Mary was born with original sin, but she never acted on it, so she was more or less perfect. And then, when Gabriel, the Archangel Gabriel, comes to her to announce that, she is going to, give birth to Jesus, that in that moment God removed that stain of original sin, so that, again, when Jesus was born, he would have perfect human flesh. Another doctrinal difference is that the Assumption of Mary is a doctrine in the Catholic Church, but it's not in the Orthodox Church. This is a teaching that was defined by the Catholic Church in 1950. But basically, the understanding is that, and the teaching never specifically states whether Mary died or not, but that when her time on earth ended, again, doesn't mean whether she died or did not die, but basically God took her body and soul into heaven. There is a feast in the Orthodox Church which does celebrate the Assumption of Mary, but it's not a doctrine within the Church. But there is a feast that celebrates this particular event. And one more. A presbyter/priest is necessary to celebrate the sacrament of marriage in the Orthodox Church, but not in the Catholic Church. Both the Catholic and the Orthodox Church recognize marriage to be a sacrament, but how they recognize it to be a sacrament is different. On the Catholic side, it's actually the couple that makes the sacrament. So if they are married before a priest, and they don't have to be, but if they are married before a priest, the priest is viewed as nothing more than the witness. It's actually the couple that makes the sacrament. But on the Orthodox side, a priest is necessary because it's seen as Jesus is the celebrant through the priest. So a priest in this case is necessary. And this difference between Catholics and Orthodox on the issue of marriage probably also relates to how they have a different attitude towards the issue of divorce. In the Orthodox Church, a divorce is allowed up to, I believe, 3 times, whereas in the Catholic Church, divorce is not allowed. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with the difference between how both sides understand marriage to be a sacrament. Well, anyway, that's all that we have for the second portion of Christianity. So if you do have any questions, please send me an email. Till then, take care.